Thank you, Carolina. So I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Carolina, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
perfect
awesome.
pronunciation.
Uh, Thanks for joining our podcast. Let's talk about data. It's a pleasure to have you from Germany. You are in Germany right now, right?
Yes, I'm based in Germany. I'm in Berlin.
Okay, awesome. So again, let's start. Our style is we give the floor to our guest to introduce themselves. So floor is all yours, Carolina. Tell us about yourself.
Okay, well, thank you, Mustafa, for the time. As a small introduction, then I am Carolina Matamoros. I am, let's say, a data leader with over 12 years of experience overall. My life had not always been in the private sector. In fact, most of my professional career was as a public servant back in Colombia,
Okay.
where, let's say, my focus was more directed into how to use data for actually doing policy decisions. So, like, policy making and any type of those types of decisions were rounded on actual data and not only gut instinct. And I would say that's actually what got me into data governance in general terms. If you see my profile, it's a little bit interesting because I
Yeah, yeah,
am
yeah.
an industrial engineer with a master's also in engineering. And then I got into the public sector to do capability building for the Ministry of National Defense, where I needed to, let's say, set indicators, do long term planning, do that type of stuff. And throughout that part, I got, let's say, hinted that my technical voice was at the end not going to help doing the decisions because decisions are to be done with policy reasoning. And that took me actually out of the public service for 2 years to do another master's, also here in Germany,
Wow.
in public policy. So, with that, let's say that my profile fully went into okay policy making with a data background for actually pushing decisions which whoever was involved in that. So I did finish my master's with that focus, and then went back to Colombia and started net. And in that time is what actually got me into the IT sector because I went into the Ministry of Information, Technology and Communications, and also like National Planning Department and all of that. But of course, now with a much more focus into policies for data handling, even though still in the public sector. While being there, I actually got the job offer from BASF to be a data governance expert here in Germany, in Berlin. And let's say that the trade-off of, let's say, job security that Germany offers definitely made the offer very, very interesting and brought me over to Germany to precisely work on that. And that's how I ended up being in BASF, my current employer, working first as a data governance expert, then data governance lead, and now also today governance and catalog lead for the agricultural solutions operational division. But that's like, okay, my background, I understand. Let's say that is not necessarily as straightforward as so many people involved in data is. Usually it's either a lot of growth within development and actually IT
Mhm.
kind of progress, or others that are much more into management. But I have been doing a little bit of a mixed approach where I would say that led me to think of data governance much more related to policymaking. And I think this particular, let's say, input is something that a lot of companies could benefit of because data governance is not a topic of IT or a topic of technology or a topic of even data itself. It's people management. And when you talk about any type of policy, not or any type of governance, this is directed to changing people's behaviors. So if I am, let's say, not talking about um, let's say, yeah, I don't know, traffic and things like that. You get some types of policies that tell you you cannot go over that speed limit, or the type of behavior is prohibited. You cannot look at your cell phone, or things like that. So, those types of laws and regulations are directed into changing people's behavior while they drive or are in the transit scene, right? And that happens both for pedestrians, drivers, anything. Then if you brought that into what we do in either corporations or organizations of the public sector, into how are we supposed to handle our data, that's where data governance is. It's
Yeah.
telling people, hey, you need to take accountability for the data you're responsible for. And what does that accountability look like? How do you manage things? How do you ensure that your data is of high quality? How do you ensure that a thing is a source of truth? How do you agree across the organization that a customer is a customer? And things like that.
True.
And always is behavior based, because at the end, even though we now have a lot of tools, then we can get a little bit about it that can support the governance conversations can be AI based, and a lot of machines now can support this type of work. Still, at the end, we humans need to agree
True.
into how to use and interpret this data so that companies are able to actually take actions based on that information. Otherwise, it's just cost. Like it costs you to have data, it costs you to store data, it costs you to collect data. But if all of that data is not being used for your own decisions or the decisions of their company, and there are no actions derived from the data you have, it was just cost. So, of course, that's a little bit where that, let's say, merged approach of why governance is much more people based and how you can actually nudge and change people behavior comes from, and why I think it's actually an interesting approach to have been first a public servant and now working from the approach within a particular corporation just to help them manage better their data. But
Okay.
yeah, that's
Awesome.
a little bit about me and slightly within the topic, but let's
Yeah.
make it much more of a conversation. So,
Yeah. It's great. Thanks for your whole background. You have come from a public sector, went into data. Now you are in a data governance. And the company you mentioned, right, when you talk about data governance, by the way, before we start this conversation, yesterday I had a podcast, Winfred with Norway, from Norway, and the session was again data governance. So
mhm.
just yesterday, just to tell you that I had data governance. So for my audience, I will try to make it more organization kind of government, that how governance, as you mentioned, that it is all about data culture, it is all about policies, right? And you are coming from the policies angle. So let's make our this session towards policies and how policies need to be converted into data, and how company culture can follow that, because this is one of the biggest challenge right now, right? That we have come from centralized approach towards federated approach, and all these kind of issues are coming: data architecture issues, data quality issues, data lineage. We can name a lot, right? So let's start from data governance, because in yesterday's session, the gentleman mentioned to me that we have to treat data governance just as any other governance. There is regulatory governance, there is risk governance, there are many governance practices in an organization. So data governance need to have that place in an organization. Unfortunately, it is treated as an IT department. Maybe that is why we are having. So what's your take on this one?
Okay, so let me give you an example.
Yeah.
Uh, in any company, we have now tons of BI tools. Let's say any type of dashboard can be a Power BI.
Mhm.
And we can make a policy that says you can only consume data that is system based. That's very straightforward principle, kind of a policy, kind of a very strict rule
Mhm.
that people really hate following, but it's important. So it's similar to a little bit like, yeah, what I was saying on the cell phone on while you are driving. Sure, you will maybe still get drivers that still use your phone, but the more that they don't do that, the better it is for overall traffic.
Mhm.
Translating this for the Power BIs. If you have Power BIs that are being based with system-based data rather than, I don't know, they do a manual download of the data themselves, then they do some transformations in that particular file, and then that is what is presented or chosen within that particular dashboard. And
Mhm.
this is a problem that happens, I would say, worldwide in a lot of organizations, because you stop trusting the figures across the board, because whatever leadership in a particular country sees, let's say, of sales versus what you get globally or by controlling or what you get by finance, maybe you don't get the same figures. And that ends up happening because at some point in this manual manipulation of the data, some changes were made. Maybe you did a subtraction. Maybe there was a tax consideration that was not done in the global environment, and that makes that particular figure no longer match. And then you end up leadership saying, okay, what is the number I need to trust?
Hmm.
Because they start saying a lot of numbers very differently, and it's only because the dashboards are not being built from, and let's just start small, because
Yeah.
then we can talk about data products and let's say more mature solutions. But at least you can say, hey, please only use system-based data. And in there we have like CRM and other SAPs and other type of solutions that, of course, still very complex. Still, you have a lot of reports that talk about sales,
Mhm.
but at least you can ensure that it's not something that is locally manipulated by whoever was doing the report. And then when they shift the position, no one ever again is able to know what was that they were doing. What is uncomfortable behavior that creates having you only use data from system base? This particular uh, analyst that wants to do the report and sees the figure and he knows that he needs to subtract whatever,
Hmm.
but the information is not showing in that way. Instead of he himself doing the change, needs to reach out to the source system and say, hey, source system, this particular information is not showing properly because this is missing. And then you start to change actually the business process that is behind that particular calculation. So it's much more broader and helps that you can eventually get the information across the board. But yes, it's difficult. It implies people actually knowing who to reach
Yeah.
and being able to properly explain what is that they do need. And with big corporations that have a lot of history and a lot of ways of working that may differ by country and country, this behavior becomes very difficult to promote. So that's why you also need things like checking quick wins, or let's say providing prizes to good behavior, right? So
Hmm.
you can do, let's say, championships and show that, okay, in this country, this report is built like this, and then this is what we want, so that you can also promote that good behavior so that hopefully that starts to spread across the organization. But this also means that it's not something that happens right away because you wrote it down as it happens with laws. We can have a law that the law it doesn't mean that it's being followed.
Hmm.
Important part is that eventually you get people to comply with it and agree with it, and even at some point even say, okay, it of course makes sense. That's very much safer for me and for everybody else. Again, with the example with the cell phone driving,
Hmm.
most people understand why
Hmm.
it's important that they don't use their phone while they're driving. And that included a lot of public service announcements, so a lot of communication. It included a lot of effort and money and so on, so to eventually change that behavior, and that takes time. I would say we have been with cell phones, what, around 30 years?
Yeah.
And I would say until the last decade, the behavior has actually been able to be in place across even worldwide. But um, for companies exactly like this, then this also it's important to set good change management expectations,
Hmm.
because of course end of the road is the golden egg, real-time data, you can always trust it, source of truth, we can use it for AI, that's the end. But to get to there,
Yeah. A
there's
lot
a
of things.
lot of culture change and things that are not that immediate, that are slightly difficult to track, that would require different types of KPIs that also people agreed to be measured on, right? So of course that's where a lot of company friction, process friction comes in and makes this quite an interesting process to look like, and why also it's critical that we do involve leadership on it.
Mhm.
So that's a little bit my take on why I can say, okay, this is
That's
culture
perfect.
change and why it's people and all of that, which is a little bit oriented to your original question.
No, no, that's a great answer. Let me put another question on top of the question, right? The example was great, as you mentioned that if you are well, it's a very simple and good example because everybody can correlate. Power BI, we are saying BI tool, it can be Tableau, it can be anything, right? Right. So a policy can be, as you mentioned, hey, whatever numbers shows, it has to come from a proper in data engineering pipeline. You cannot patch it. Now,
Mm-hmm.
question comes. Sometimes what happens, the people who are patching the data, right? Now to do create a pipeline, it takes months and months sometime. And
Mm-hmm.
even it takes less time, but if you automate it, there is a tool required, there is a processing power required. You have to buy a connector from, let's say, SAP, right? You have to buy a connector. So it's more expensive as compared to just download the Excel file from SAP and load it manually. So sometimes management also do not give approvals that, hey, okay, let's load it Excel, but the responsible person is this. Make sure data. So how, as a policy maker, how you make sure, because ROA is not meeting. If you automate things, Excel is much easier. You can have two people sitting here downloading 10 Excel every day and uploading. The moment you create a pipeline, it takes a complete project. First of all, which will take months, then data quality, you understand all those things. So how do you cater this challenge, convincing management to enable this?
All right. So
Is it a fair
I would
question?
say you can look for other type of middle of the road solutions
Okay.
because it doesn't necessarily implies that you need to do an entire change of the data pipeline itself. It's important to understand where the source is and see if the change can be done at source level. So in the example we were just talking about, it was, let's say, that you needed to subtract the specific local tax that was applied to the sales information. At the source level, we can absolutely include a new variable that would be estimated task for region, right? So at that source level, you can include the variable and make it much more direct so that at the end, you can do the subtraction already in Power BI, but you don't need to do the manipulation in the pipeline.
Mm-mm.
So still, it's not as fast as you do it in Excel.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure, implies talking to the source owner that they understand why they need to manipulate a little bit the architecture of their data model so that they do include this particular new variable, but
Mm,
also understand why that variable is needed. So, like this particular example, then yes, country can very much explain why they need to subtract X, and even though that subtraction only happens in that country, surely you can include that particular variable so that at the end in the dashboard they can do the subtraction and show the right figure. And then even if it's not only this particular analyst that is creating the Power BI, if somebody else also consumes information from that source
mm,
and creates a new dashboard as well, they can also see that particular variable and say, oh, if I actually want to get the net, most likely I will need to subtract. But then that includes that the new variable of tax is described and says somewhere that, okay, this is a cost, and eventually you will need to subtract if you need that type of description is
mm.
also type of a rule that usually comes with data governance. That would be that I need you to also, in your data models, properly describe not only your data source, but each of your variables so that people understand how to use it. Because again, the purpose is that people understand it, not
Yeah.
that you can get reports quickly. So for people, we need descriptions.
Mm,
And those descriptions, usually people hate doing that workload. And it's something where I would say now the AI tools that can support this type of governance are actually quite smart. And we can, let's say, do a prompt to suggest to give us a description so that you don't need to do all the thingy thingy. But still, owner would need to agree if
mm.
the suggested definition from the AI actually matches what that variable is, right? But
Yeah.
sure, that can happen. And then you can have people in multiple places creating reports that would have the same outcome.
Mm, mm,
Instead of, oh, I did this one time in Excel myself,
mm.
and then nobody else is able to replicate. And
Yeah.
what ends up happening is that, well, then you get thousands of reports and you don't know anymore what is the truth. Because
And
the
if
truth should be coming from the source, not from the report.
yeah, and if
Right?
that person leaves, who has created that
You're
report,
screwed.
so let's relate a question with this on data culture, right? We have been talking this, data culture, change of data culture, right? Bring data culture in your organization. Normally, people think that creating a report, having few reports, are data culture. I don't agree on it. I feel data culture is something when you're even thinking, you think about data, not the your gut feel, right? So how data governance play their role in an organization to bring data culture at the working level? Because management, yes, there is a big issue of trusting of the data by management, but management is still willing to use dashboards, reports, and they are willing to do it. But data culture at a working level where it really matters, right? That is still struggling. So, what is the role of data governance or governance team to bring data culture at working level?
I would say that at the working level, there are a couple of things. First is to make people aware that all the time they're still working with data.
Mm,
All the time. Like
mm,
even if you are, I don't know, maintaining the inventory in a stock warehouse and your work is mostly manual, but still, within that particular work, every time you upload the information of inventory, you are responsible of that data collection, right? So it's to bring awareness of the multiple tasks people actually take place
mm,
every time in the data cycle, because
mm,
people are related either in collecting, storing, analyzing, or deleting data at some point of their work. And this is not something that it needs to be delegated to IT. No, it's part of their job. And I think, and this is now personal opinion, it's not abroad like in the overall framework of data governance and in the Dama book, but I think there was a mistake when we started to create the framework for governance and started to define roles such as owner, steward, custodian, and so on, because it, in the way it was communicated, it made people think that these are additional positions and additional work. And at the end, it's not really additional positions, but it's just awareness of their data tasks that are related to everyday job.
mhm,
So is in any business analyst that is part of customer analytics, this person is doing analysis and transformations of data, and they are responsible for the transformations they do.
mm,
So that part, I think, got separated by creating these roles because they say, oh, that's responsibility of the data owner, product owner, whatever owner, and not me because I am business analyst.
mm,
And also we can have that with the data architects and the data engineers and everyone that usually is part of a delivery team, because they would say, no, I am no owner.
mm,
So that actually created, in my opinion, that type of, let's say, friction, instead of making people realize that in their everyday job
mm,
is simply part of what they do. The ownership should be related to their tasks and what they are responsible for their work. So a little bit also within their own contracting, whatever their task was. In the example of the warehouse, yeah, they have a responsibility to ensure that whatever upload of data they're doing is the most accurate possible. Of course, human error can happen, and maybe there are some entries that had some mistake. Somebody later down the pipeline is due to check. Maybe there was a spike, an outlier, particular data doesn't match properly, but that type of analysis then falls on somebody else. But that particular person is responsible both of uploading the information and also deleting. If you no longer have the inventory, you need to say, oh, this thing is no more. You need also to, for example, raise request of, I no longer have this article in the warehouse. So like that type of request, yeah, is also data.
yes. Knowingly or unknowingly, everybody is doing data. Either they are
Every
aware or
time,
they are
and
not
it
aware.
should be part of their data, of no, not their not data, of their employee contract,
It is
because
awareness,
they
right?
are managing data. And I do think that in terms of data protection, this was handled a little bit more wisely, because I believe now everybody knows that you are responsible of not being phished, of
Mm,
keeping protection of the data you manage, if it's confidential or non-confidential, like the classification and security of industry and so on. Also to avoid either getting, viruses, scams, and all of that. That type of protection, the first entry level, that we are all aware that we play
mm,
a part on protecting the information from the company. I think that message was communicated. And this is not something that data has properly shared, which is everybody. has some responsibility related to the data they work with. And it should be at that very basic level.
Yeah, so related to this question, my next question, as you mentioned, everyone should be responsible of their data, right? So tell us that, do data governance teams play their part or have policies for every persona or every role which is involved in this journey?
And I think that's where we commit a little bit the issue on the frameworks, because we will not be able to do an addition of every role and position within the company related to the tasks they do. And that's where we got into the generic, you're a data owner, a data custodian, a data steward. Because a owner, let's say it's responsible for a type of report of something that is happening. So again, into now the example of inventory, I would say that the owner of inventory definitely is not the person that is doing the upload of information. Maybe they are responsible of each and every entry, but the person who is responsible for the entire inventory, most likely it's receiving information from multiple warehouses,
Mm,
and they with that information either raise the reports or like do some other type of let's say have broader responsibilities that are triggered with that particular information,
mm,
right? But his role still would be owner, implying that they need to ensure the quality of the information. So, okay, what is happening in this warehouse that the information is not coming over? Most likely they do that naturally. They don't need me to tell them to do that.
mm,
Like, oh, this warehouse is no longer sending me data, or the connection is not coming in. Why? So, usually that type of ownership happens because they feel themselves responsible of that inventory,
mm,
right? They will be the owners. Maybe then within their team, they do have some type of analyst that could be described either as a steward, as a custodian, where they can check for the quality, do some day-to-day modifications into it, do to that type more of enhanced assessment of the data. And of course, that happens again in every, let's say, division and type of operations, where usually you would have some sort of managers and some sort of analysts behind them, and then the people that are doing the manual work that lets the data collection happen. But again, we will not be able to do the edits of each and every employee contract. That doesn't make sense. And that's where we ended up into these weird, oh, we have data owners and data stewards and data custodians, because the hope would have been that people would be able to translate what being a data owner implies in their position. And that translation is something that is missing. So that's
yeah.
something in communication where definitely in governance we can improve, so that people can do the connections themselves. Like, oh, yes, I am responsible for inventory and I care that the information of the data is there. So I'm actually performing these tasks. So, like, doing the connection and making people aware that that's actually part of the responsibility helps. Maybe also in terms of the contracts, maybe we can include explicitly that they would be data owners of the data they manage, or things like that, very high level, so that when they see the owner description, they are also aware of the tasks related to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say in there, there's a broad, let's say, gap
Mm,
where some organizations have developed it. Like I have seen very good data owners in, let's say, different, let's say, broad discussions that are beyond my companies
mm,
or organizations I've been in. So I know there are owners and stewards that have been able to properly perform their roles, but most organizations struggle with it.
mm. So it means what we are saying here is, when we, so you correctly mentioned that rather than going at a deeper level, we created a generic data governance policies and standard. That is where the awareness get dissolved somewhere there. That a person comes onto a role, he has a HR induction deck or presentation, but in that deck, nobody tells what is your roles, governance, standards. Rather
Mhm.
than it depends on the team lead and the nature of the team lead, whether for every new person coming in, whether he's conducting something. So, am I right to say that, or am I right to suggest that whenever a new person comes in, because in an organization there are certain number of roles, we already know the roles. Number
Yeah.
of employees increase, but roles hardly change until unless a new role comes out, right? So if we already have a role, can I suggest or am I on the right direction that when a new employee comes in, along with HR induction session, there has to be a governance person over there or governance, I can say content need to be there for which should be unique for. So there's a portion which is generic. Then there need
Mhm.
to be a portion which should be unique for the role and telling them, hey, let's say you are a data modeler. Now, if you are a
Mhm.
data modeler, you need to understand the policies because once you pull data from source systems like DAS, data as a service, let's talk about that. You are downloading data like LinkedIn or someone somewhere there. A lot
Mhm.
of companies allows you the policy that once data comes in, you can't even store, you can virtualize. Some says you can download, you cannot transform. Some says you can download, you can transform, you can use. Some says you can download, transform, but when our contract ends with you, you have to delete everything, right? So when data modeler comes, someone need to tell this data modeler, hey, when you are modeling from certain sources, there are 50 odd sources, there are three sources where you cannot transform your data. So the data modeling he has to do into that manner. So am I in the right direction that when someone is inducting, there has to be this kind of session?
I think to have that type of session definitely would be useful. And I think this is also slightly related to what I would say is now also a trend, which is like that federated governance approach,
Yeah.
where you start to split the business into the different business areas they have,
I
and
want to
each
come there. I
area
want to
has
come
their own
there.
slight or standard rules.
Yeah,
Of
yeah,
course, you have like the broad, so broad rule, only use system, and
yeah.
then standard within the areas would be a little bit like maybe time wise when you do taxes or
Mm,
think like now it becomes very business like, and in that business like again should be that business area that takes responsibility of defining these types of rules
mm,
and putting them in a translatable way into what they're doing part of their process. But that's the critical part.
mm,
All of these tasks that I am talking about, your management, you check quality, you do, they should be part of their business process. They shouldn't be part of the tasks that are within it. And
mm,
of course, I would say it would be important that data people are involved in the conversation that defines the entire process so
mm,
that we can highlight, hey, that's a task. That data task needs to happen there. That task needs to happen here. So that at least it's identified and hopefully then employees that need to perform the process are aware of those particular tasks. And
mm,
of course, then that it goes with much less friction. And I would say that would be definitely an advantage from governance if we're able to better tie
mm,
whatever the recommendations on data management are into the business processes because they shouldn't be like this parallel thing that we should be doing is part of your day-to-day job, so it should already be part of the business process. It shouldn't be like this, oh, by the way, we didn't thought about data. It should have been
uh-huh,
since the beginning. But I would say a lot of instances are there where for whatever reason, it was not part of the conversation before. And then we have resistance of including it within the business process. But for me, that's the way to actually bridge that gap because if you put it in a business process, it's very clear on the task and it's very clear on the employee and so on. So definitely in that type of description, the secret is within the business process. And that would happen as well with the data modeler. Most likely it's happening in the transformation to
yeah, yeah. There is
create a
data
particular report.
modeler, there is
Yeah.
analyst, there are testers, there are developers. Developers are n number of developers, right? So all those are there. Okay, at the same time, we just brought in this point of federated governance, right? So it's one of my favorite topic because I have my own architecture called as data and AI cognitive DAF architecture, where I have come up with enterprise zone and business zones. Because when this
Mhm.
whole federated approach came in, which is people call it data mesh, where
Yep.
everyone have their own autonomy, but in that autonomy, a small data governance goes every domain,
Mhm.
and that is where my conflict comes. I feel yes, 100% autonomy has to be with business, but
Mm.
as far as governance is concerned, along with governance may be another party. I call it enterprise data management team, EDM. They, that team and governance team has to have a hub and spoke model. So all domains can have their own governances, but there has to be a centralized governance
Yeah,
for
definitely.
everything, because people confuse federated with decentralized. For me, if you everyone have their own governances, own autonomy, that is decentralized. That was already a failure 3 decades back. We don't
Yeah.
want people to have their own wild, wild west. You have autonomy, but you have somebody there. So within an organization, body have another body, right? A hub there who is giving you global GDPR, PDPR, all those policies, and then
Mhm.
spokes can have their own policies. They have, but their policies need to be known
I
by,
would say
yeah,
it always helps to try to put it back into public approach or awareness,
yeah,
because for whatever reason people are tend to feel familiar with whatever laws and regulations there are, even if we don't go too much into law regarding them. And then also because of like the huge US influence everywhere,
yeah,
most people is aware of how the US works.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
would say federated governance is a little bit similar to how the government in the US works. You have things for the entire uh, United States, like the federal laws, and then by state, you have
yeah,
slight and weird differences that are dependent on state. So if we go again with the taxes example, then we would have federal law. We will have taxes by consumption, but the rate of the tax is then set at a state level,
mm,
right? And that's why nobody knows how much anything is expensive in the US because, yeah, numbers change. But that is exactly what would be happening in federated governance. You have these broad rules that need to be followed. Again, let's say, example, system should come from system, and then by domains would maybe go a little bit more specific. It not only needs to be a specific source system, it needs to come from Salesforce, to give an example that usually happens with whatever commercial area
mm,
or whoever their CRM main platform is. So instead of saying system, they are already specifying the platform that it needs to come from. So
mm,
they name them and make it much more strong so that, again, that duplicity from where the information is coming from is solved. Example that does happen within broad companies. The CRM system maybe doesn't work in each and every country.
mm,
So we would have most of the information coming from the main one, with the commercial area, let's say, promoting and highly hinting that we should eventually migrate to that central CRM solution. But in the meantime, we need to figure out how to manage the exceptions. But
mm,
these exceptions should be exceptions, not the rule. So however the data model was built is most likely following the structure of the central CRM. And then these other small ones need to figure out how to match there, not the other way around.
yeah. Okay, we have a time check. Do you have a hard stop in next 4 minutes?
I do have a hard stop at
Okay,
11. I'm sorry about
okay.
it.
No worries at
Uh,
all. Last question.
Perhaps
Yeah.
something I would like to briefly mention that I shared with you within the preparation of the conversation before, which I named something that is on the lines of computational governance, which is
Okay.
a little bit, let's say, the IT system that should be put in place to precisely support this type of decisions. And this will be bridge or should be bridging a lot of the gaps we have with the middle solutions, because organizational wise, ownership is not that pushed back from, because at that level they are aware they are responsible for that type of reporting, but the cataloging, the small management of variables, the maintenance on the pipelines, the maintenance of lineage,
Mm,
that this type of information usually is struggled with, and companies tend to not have the people to do the work. So I would say now we have a lot of solutions, also AI, that can help bridge this.
mm,
So it's important that from the IT system, where I just said IT is not responsible for a lot of things, The decisions are from business, but IT is still there to provide a service. And now I am talking as part of an IT department where we are trying to set that up for our businesses so that they are successful on bringing over their data ambitions. From IT, we should be responsible of setting an environment that enables them to do those decisions. What that environment should be. We do have a catalog. We do have a virtual warehouse that has a visualization layer so that people are able to look the data without modifying it. We are responsible of having a IT system that properly reflects the business processes. We also have another system that manages all of HR and type of personnel information, right? We do have the commercial systems as well. So the way that this IT system is integrated and provided to the business should be done in a way that facilitates their decisions. So this type of automated lineage inherited from the modeling so that the whatever who is modeling is not with the concern that I need to also document this in a catalog, or having a catalog person without any awareness of how that was built, struggling to take in the information so that this information is allocated. It's important. So my end output would be from the IT department. We really, really need to care on how to make the most of the IT solutions we are providing to the businesses so that most of the decisions can either be automated or simplified by the IT itself, where most likely most of the decisions, assertiveness, and everything else will still come from business. But we need to be aware that maybe a lot of the middle is an important automation that maybe in there would not put people's jobs in dangers, but actually a great place where AI agents can be promoted so that we can check better for compliance, for data quality, for maintenance. It can happen 24/7. So of course, in there, there's an opportunity of tasks that people don't want to do, but need to be done.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Again, we have a time check. It's already spot on. We are 11 o'clock your side. Thank you so much, Carolina. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I learned a lot. I saw a different angle of governance, looking into governance, and I totally agree with you that IT need to be there and data culture need to be there. And all because everybody, known or unknown, they are using data. So you just need to go and tell them you are already using data, and if you don't use properly, this is how is going to hurt company. Maybe a closing remark is critical data elements. Everyone should know the company's organization critical data elements and should know that in their role they are hitting this critical elements. So they need to make sure they don't do anything silly and it hurts the organization. Again, thank you so much. Pleasure.
I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to finding it online.
Yeah. We
Yeah,
can have a follow-up session as well, maybe a couple of quarters
yeah,
from here.
would be lovely. I would be happy to.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a nice day. Take care. Bye bye.
Likewise, was a pleasure.
Bye bye.
Bye.